because the automatic pilot was doing it. So we need to be a presence pilot, and then also realize that there'll be times when we don't really function because we don't have the automatic pilot anymore. When we went into so-called mania, we were fully present as the pilot, and we're not used to that. And that presence pilot messes up the automatic pilot, and so we lose our so-called executive function of the automatic pilot. That's why I don't really buy into executive function as it's defined now, because it's based on the automatic pilot that is happening when we are having our repetitive memories going on, and we're trying to like set goals in our mind and project them and move towards them. That has nothing to do with the moment. There's a totally different process of seeing the moment fully, and then some richness of the moment is available to us. And so I can see how this shift messes up our executive function. So when we're in mania, we're able to function very well in a totally different way, totally different behaviors. And then when that goes away, we're not able to function because basically executive function is meaningless once you've gone into mania. So it has no meaning. So it actually is a state of repetitive thoughts going on that have no meaning. And mania is full of meaning. Every moment feels so meaningful that it's very intense. And how can the brain go back to meaninglessness once it's had this sense of meaning? So normally our senses are conditioned by thought, but then that gets deconditioned and our senses are conditioned by sensing meaning. And it's really beautiful. And this is related to something else that I've probably talked about to some extent, but so this is related to fight, flight, or freeze. When we're in fight or flight or freeze, sometimes things can also happen where we think, how did I do that? I don't know how I did that. So say somebody jumps in a river to save somebody, and they normally wouldn't jump in a river like that, but if they see the fight or flight, the fight or flight reflex gets activated, and that intensity, it increases people's strength, it increases different things that people are able to do something superhuman and save somebody. And I feel that, and I think they probably remember what they did. They don't necessarily forget, but they're just more like, how did I do that? How did I have that strength? It was a strength I didn't know I had. And that's part of what is activated in so-called mania, but it's not fight or flight. It's this mechanism of being free from thought. And when we're free of thought, we have access to a lot more power because we're in a circuit. We're connected with the actual moment. We're not connected with the past of thought. So we might think, well, how did I do that? But actually remember it. Because, well, I don't know why exactly, but I feel that that's part of the quality we need to bring into everyday life. So we might think of fight or flight as kind of an automatic thing, but it's not really automatic. It's a matter of full perception of what's needed in the moment. And when we fully perceive everything in the circumstances, the brain understands what kind of energy and strength it needs in order to save that person. And so it tries to activate that type of energy. And so we get into contact with the strength we didn't know we had. But we can do that every moment, but not be in fight or flight. I think that's part of what that type of perception, the type of perception we have in fight or flight, that how our waking consciousness is now is only reserved for fight or flight, like a true necessary fight or flight. We also have access to that strength every moment, but We just have this different algorithm in our brain going on. So we have access to the fight, flight, freeze, or free mechanism. I feel we have that in mania. So in mania, it doesn't come in as fight or flight. That energy in regular consciousness is reserved for fight or flight, like getting out of a bad situation. But in manic consciousness, that energy is there, but it doesn't manifest as fight or flight. It manifests as higher energy to perceive meaning in the moment and be free from the thought forms that would keep us imprisoned in the reality that we've been living. So it's no longer fight or flight. But what I'm trying to say too is that when we come back to regular consciousness, we're now in fight or flight. Because in regular consciousness, it is reserved for fight or flight. But when we're in manic consciousness, that extra energy just gives us a real power and strength to manifest our dreams. But in this structure, that energy is only reserved for fight or flight. So what I'm saying is, if we have that type of energy in mania, it's not fight or flight. It's possibility, perceiving possibility, moving based on that. Full action, not delaying based on thinking, oh, I'll do something later, doing it now. And our brain is still in that. But the thing is that when we go back to regular consciousness, we're in fight or flight or freeze. So often we end up freezing, which is what happens, and we're helped along by the medications. And when we're in freeze, we don't have any executive functioning. So it might look like we're not functioning, but we're in freeze. If we stop taking the medication, we'll probably be in fight or flight, and we're fighting and running from the system. Or that's kind of what happens when we feel like somebody's after us or whatever. Because at a certain point, that high energy of creating dreams and manifesting dreams, we sort of get to the edge of where we can go with that, and then it turns into fight or flight. Like, the world of thought is catching up to us. Our brain is moving faster and stronger, so we're able to go so far ahead of this whole structure of thought in society, but the gravity of it's so big that it will eventually come and swallow us up. And when it gets close, we start to have this fight or flight reaction happen, and we feel like somebody's out to get us. And there's nobody out to get us. It's just the structure of society. I don't want to say just, but it's that structure. The structure of society is in opposition to us living our dreams for the most part. So, and then when we get captured by that, we usually freeze. And then the meds do what they do. They kind of tranquilize us in freeze. But then when the energy comes back, it's not even really coming back. It's just the freeze is going away, and we end up going back into free. So a way to keep the fight or flight or freeze away of thought catching up with us, of systems of thought catching up with us, whether it's the family system of what we should be or the psychiatric system of what we should be, we can keep that away. And if we can keep that away, we can stay in free. We can still be free from it. So we might not be able to live our dreams right away, but we might be able to stay free of that. And when we're free, we can be co-creative. So I would say right now I'm in a free state. So I'm not literally free, like floating through the universe, but my brain is free from that thought conditioning, and I'm able to be co-creative. And part of it is I'm able to be co-creative with that conditioning, in that I can look from the outside at the structure of, say, the psychiatric system, and then create these different ideas that would help to keep different structures of thought away that would lead me to be in fight, flight, or freeze. So recently I realized there's nobody after me. It's thought. It's this different algorithm of co-creativity and freedom of the mind, and then the non-freedom of the mind of, this is who you are, this is what you should do, this is what you were supposed to be like according to everyone else, blah, blah, blah. And when that comes back, if it's through psychiatry, I'd probably be frozen, like, and afraid. So that's a long-winded thing. Oh, 53 minutes. This whole staying at home and taking care of myself takes a long time. I ate the overnight oats and then I made a smoothie, which takes time to make and wash. It took time to get those groceries, and soon it's going to be time to make dinner. And then I'll probably be out of broccoli and have to go get more. I'm not used to this. I'm used to eating Laura bars for breakfast and then going out, getting coffee, and eating dinner somewhere. And I'm realizing kind of like just getting food and having other people make it for me. I never thought about food at a restaurant this way before, and it's pretty obvious, but we're not only paying for the price of food, we're paying for the price of the cost to make it, the person taking time to make it, and also the space we might be sitting in while eating it. And one could pay for one's own space to make things and have all the tools and spend time going to get the groceries or even ordering them online. Then it takes a lot of time to make those things. So by having a kitchen, one is almost forced to make food for themselves, and it takes a lot of time and energy. Of course, that seems reasonable, but try and do a 2-month trial where you don't cook at home at all. You maybe eat breakfast at home, like a breakfast bar, but the rest you get out and about. And it is pretty eye-opening, actually. I'm seeing that now. And something that probably clued me into thinking about that is what Steve Pavlina said today about something in his talk. He mentioned delegation. And he mentioned that every time you buy a coffee, you're delegating making coffee to someone else. But we don't think of it that way. We think of it as just buying a coffee. So I think that's why it came to mind that paying for a coffee, we're also paying for that space that they've had to make the coffee for us and the people to make the coffee. So no wonder it costs more. So if one doesn't want to make one's own coffee or have space to make coffee, then it costs a bit more because one's not paying for that space and everything that goes along with making the coffee. But one doesn't even need a kitchen to make coffee, but still, just thinking about it in that way after my experiment of eating at restaurants pretty much for a month has changed my view, and I almost feel like I don't want to make food for myself as much. I like being out and about. So what that would require for me is sunshine, because I don't like to be out and about in the rain. So I'm doing that this year, and then perhaps one day having like a co-creative community where there's a smoothie bar where people make smoothies that enjoy making smoothies for everyone. And so there's an opportunity for health, because that's the next thing I could do is try to find the healthiest options of eating out and about. I wasn't doing that last time. So now that I realize, hey, maybe I don't want to make my own food as much, where can I eat that's healthier? Because I do want to be healthier. My goal of making my own food isn't because I enjoy making my own food, it's to be healthier. So I can definitely design that into being out and about and supporting those businesses as well. Unfortunately, there's not many healthy places where I'm living right now. So that could be something to think about for me when I get back, is maybe I want to pay a little bit more for the room I'm living in when I get back, but be closer to healthier restaurants. There are a lot downtown, that's for sure, but I'm quite far away. So there's some places you can be right on the same block as a bunch of healthy restaurants. And not only that, it's a way to be more social and meet up with people who also want to eat at a restaurant here and there. That's something I did learn by being out and about. So here I am thinking, oh, I'm out and about eating at restaurants to avoid being at home and I don't have a kitchen to cook it anyway, and I'm learning something totally different. So that's what I like about the journey of a mental health diagnosis, is that I learn a lot. I learn a ton, and that's the part that keeps me going, is that I know I can keep learning. And so, by delegating coffee, like I would go get a coffee sometimes this month and sit in Tim Hortons and drink it and watch the recording of Steve Pavlina's talk that day if I didn't get to watch it live. Or I was able to watch it live there, I think, too, depending on if I was there at that time. And I don't have to clean up. Yeah, the cup thing is a bit wasteful, for sure. So that's something that I'm learning. And I have to go make dinner for myself soon, and I don't necessarily want to. And what else do I want to talk about? I made up another little word. Instead of bipolar, I put bijective. And bijective being a play on subjective and objective. So I feel like we go between subjectivity and objectivity. And that's what I'm using to summarize going between different states, like the dreaming while wide awake, awakening state, and the more sleepy state of self-conscious ego structure. And there's many ways to explain why that is more of a sleepy state. And part of it is what I was just describing. That last chunk of the video I made, I put as the first 10 minutes of this one because it was too long for the whole video with the earlier bits. So I was saying how having the thought self stuff going on is not even knowing how one is doing anything. And in a way that is closer to the truth, even of being in a really awake state, because there's no doer, it's perception and action in the moment. I won't get into that now, but saying objective versus subjective, I kind of like that. It's better than saying depression and mania. And I think we get more depressed after we've been in the subjective dream creativity meaning algorithm of the brain, and then we come back to this sort of historical, boring, repetitive, memory-based, believing projection algorithm. So the thing too is I feel that when we go into that subjective state, there's nobody to know. There's no real self-consciousness. There's full awareness of things that are happening. And so I don't think we can stop some of the stuff that happens when we transition from subjective back to objective consciousness, but we can by perceiving in the moment, we can be very aware of what's happening. So our brain is in this freedom algorithm of co-creating with the moment. And then I was trying to explain in the last one, when we go back to objectivity, consciousness, it manifests as fight, flight, or freeze when we were before in free. So when the thoughts start coming around us in terms of other people and circumstances to sort of capture that energy, we experience fight or flight or freeze. And we can feel afraid to death, and we can even feel like we are dying. So to me, those would be objective signs that we're going back into objectivity. It's not literally we're dying or the world is ending, but feeling in this way can be an obvious sign that we are, coming in for a landing and going back to objective consciousness. I used to call this transconscious. So we can objectively feel the signs or see the signs of going back to that other form of consciousness, which is really a different dimension of the mind and a different dimension of the world. And it's like returning from space. It's kind of scary. We might, and it's the death of that subjectivity dominant state. And so we might actually mistake that feeling of death of the subjectivity. When we're going back into objectivity, we might mistake in action that for, oh, we need to kill ourselves. And so when that's happening objectively, the subjectivity is really afraid. And the fear is coherent with what is sort of objectively seeming to happen. It seems like the body might end its own existence of its own accord. But what could be seen to be happening in a way is man, it's really hard to explain. It has something to do with the layers of repetitive thought, repetitive thought coming back online and going back into autopilot mode. So when that happens, the autopilot mode of thought would almost kill the body. And then the subjectivity is watching in fear of that. And it takes a lot of strength of the subjectivity to save the objective body when that's happening. So I'm trying to relate the subjectivity to being free of the systems of thought. And then when the systems of thought start to come back on, we're more objective, but there's a transition period. And in that transition period, even the subjectivity can be afraid for the life of the objective body. And the thought coming back on would almost kill the body to spite the subjectivity. And so what it seems like I've been doing with how I've learned how to handle that while alone is that I've trained my subjectivity enough to know how to save myself when that comes back on, instead of relying on the psychiatric system to do that. So they might tranquilize me, but I can tranquilize myself, or I can take other supplements that will sort of calm down the body. You know, it's kind of like being rebirthed into objectivity, and it's really frightening. Like, imagine how afraid a baby must be when it's going through the birth canal, and we're sort of being rebirthed into objectivity. And when we are, we can bring certain wisdom back with us to diagnose, to speak of our understanding of spiritual mystery. But it's funny, we come back and we get diagnosed with a mental illness. So many of these things that happen objectively have a subjective reframe. But since we're not able to understand the subjectivity and share it with others, we end up being objectified and these things happening. But, there's still clues in the terrible stuff that's happening. To get diagnosed is terrible, but you look at the word diagnose and it means to speak of one's understanding of spiritual mystery. So you just look at the word in a different way and you're like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to do. Not sit here and be diagnosed with a mental illness and be like a vegetable or a zombie, but share that subjectivity. And so that subjectivity, there's this transition that happens, that we can see those things as happening as a sign of what's happening as the return to objectivity. So one might not be as afraid if it's like, okay, this is what's happening as the return to objectivity. And just as in consciousness, it's possible from driving from point A to point B and being like, how did that happen? I don't know what happened there. We can, when going from point A of subjectivity to point B, subjectivity can be watching these horrible objective things going on, like maybe somebody rushing to harm themselves. and thinking, how is this happening? Like, I'm not controlling this. When one felt like one was in creativity in the subjective state, well, the creativity is ending. And when the creativity is ending, we're objectified, and that almost can get mistaken as end the body. So these things can be misinterpreted. And if we're able to understand them, like, you might see how it could be a lot less fearful. And it would be almost like if somebody was in a plane and they didn't know they were in an airplane, and they started coming in for a landing, that might feel kind of scary because they didn't know they were in an airplane. But if one can realize that in that subjectivity consciousness that happens for a certain period of time, one is kind of in an airplane and there's going to be a landing. And it's kind of a scary landing, especially when one was put up in the airplane, flying it by oneself without any lessons, which is often what happens in so-called mania, or the creative meaning co-creation algorithm, versus the perception-based algorithm of the moment versus believing, history, projecting, memory. So I was also seeing mania as a call to wake up, and others around us are trying to put us back to sleep as the self. So coming in for a landing is also kind of going back to sleep with the thought algorithm. And at first the brain really resists it and can leave one non-functional, completely non-functional. And the self dies in mania, and only an illusion can die. So there's this illusion that's trying to die, but in the same way I was talking about how, this self that we have going on in autopilot or repetition, I should, blah, blah, me, blah, 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 thoughts, and we're doing something at the same time and we don't even realize how it's being done because we're not present with it. That same sort of thing happens with, sometimes when the self-harm programs come back in, because the self is harm. So then when it comes back online, sometimes it's very obvious the harm that the self is doing. And the self will often inflict harm on itself in order to call attention that it needs help, because it doesn't want to harm other people. Because the self generally does harm one's body and other people. But we don't see it that way generally. But after being in the creativity, meaning, perception algorithm, co-creating, then it's pretty obvious what the self is doing. And that's one of the reasons why we check out of that whole system. And I was talking about bipolar and bijective. So we could be bijective instead of bipolar, whatever that means. Because bipolar implies there's a person who is bipolar. But bijective implies that there is a brain that is bijective. It can see things in a subjective way or an objective way. There's no person. Like, we have this brain, but there's no person in there. Like, I don't know if anyone can see that, but there isn't. Even though sometimes we feel that way, and it's kind of compassion from the universe to make us feel like we are in control, but it's not really that way. And I got an email from Jean Houston this morning, and she's a lady that's interesting. I think she has amazing things to say. Like, maybe one day I'll be able to speak in an inspirational way and not be like blah blah mental health every other word. She's not saying that, but she sent an email about we need to unlock our quantum powers. And when I see that, I feel, man, we already had our quantum powers unlocked, and it was locked in a spring-loaded can, and when it got unlocked, it just blew up, and it was so much energy to try to navigate. And it was like being put into a completely different world where we have no compass and no map. And the map is the moment. Kind of like the Celestine prophecy. And so she's saying to people, probably people of consensus mindset, hey, we need to unlock these quantum powers. And I printed them off because I think these 5 quantum powers are important. And if you read this from the lens of, hey, I've experienced so-called mania, you'll recognize these factors as something that we were already thrust into. So no need to unlock them. We need to understand how to embody them and to rein them in because they've already been unlocked. And that's the part that I'm, hopefully one day it will say on something like this, about unlocking your quantum powers. It'll say at the bottom or the top, if you've had a spiritual emergency or extreme state of consciousness or altered state of consciousness that you were thrust into without some kind of exogenous substance like LSD or, even in that, if you had a non-volitional altered state of consciousness, you might have already experienced these. So we will help you to embody them, because when you're thrust into them and then it starts to retreat, that is a really scary process, and oftentimes we're trying to hang on to them. I think that's part of what causes the distress after a mania, is that we're trying to hang on to it. And when we feel it retreating, we get angry, we get afraid, and when we're in those states of emotion with extra power, then very powerful, fearful, subjective or objective experiences can manifest to be coherent with that inner state. If we could be like, oh, like the tide's going out, the energy's withdrawing, no big deal, maybe we wouldn't experience such a big thing. And I noticed, for me, last time I had the experience of the energy withdrawing, I noticed how the fear was trying to hook me back into some kind of help, and I didn't fall for it. So I feel like it's possible this next time I'll just notice the brain shift, and there won't be maybe any fear, and it could just be a matter of just being like, and just, oh, I'm back. Kind of just like waking up in the morning, like, oh, I won't really be some big jolty thing. Because if one is afraid, then one might think I am dying, and it's like, well, there is no I. So don't destroy the body, just be still with it. But anyway, so I would add to this, well, if you've been in extreme states of consciousness, and even if you were diagnosed with a so-called severe and persistent mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, you might recognize this as you probably went into these powers already, but you haven't learned to embody these or make them, like, you didn't have the brain circuits to handle that energy. So here's how you can build those circuits to better manifest what that energy is showing you. So her 5 quantum powers of Jean Houston, quoting them, are the power to expand time so you can do more in less time than ever before without adding stress to your life. Well, how expansive did time feel in mania, and how much could we do? How much energy did we have to do stuff? The way that it manifests as we're not able to sleep, to people who are in objective consciousness, or even if we objectify ourselves and look at the clock, could be that we've just expanded time. And that could be possible. And by expanding time, that can only happen when we have more energy. So when we have more energy, it's possible we don't need to sleep as much. And the second one, the power to experience sustained fire to keep you operating at your highest level throughout even the longest, most challenging days. Well, I had a sustained fire for a good month or 2. So how do we experience this sustained fire to operate at our highest energy level? So we've gone into the experience of being able to operate at our highest energy level. And so how do we do that more? people have probably not experienced operating as a high energy level as we have. So here's somebody wanting to take a course in order to do that. We didn't have to take a course. The power to partner with the energy of the universe to more easily accomplish your goals and fulfill your dreams. While that state of subjectivity, of co-creativity, of meaning, of perception was partnering with the universe. We don't see it that way. We're told it's a disease after. Imagine if we were told after, wow, you partnered with the universe for a good month. You must have got a lot of goals towards your dreams accomplished. But we're not told that. The power to expand and express your creativity without sacrificing your daily responsibilities. So, this one we could need to learn because we go into states of expanding and expressing our creativity, and oftentimes we do sacrifice our daily responsibilities. Like maybe we don't go to work or what have you. But I think we can learn to not sacrifice them. So basic responsibility, eating and sleeping, and perhaps going to work. But for me, I would say that it would be cool to design working when we're able to work and hibernating when we're not. So not buying into 9 to 5, but mine might be a different, mine might be 5 to 3, meaning 3 months non-functional and not really doing much, and 5 months really co-creative. So I could enter into a co-creative contract with the universe for 4 or 5 months, and then be like, well, I'm going to be eating and hanging out with friends and non-doing. And it's important to, the non-doer circuits are really important. I'm trying to write down a few notes to maybe simplify some of this at some point. So, what are our daily responsibilities? We can change that too. We don't have to go based on what we've been told they are. And the last one, the power to attract the money, people, and resources you need to move your projects forward and achieve the level of success that you're striving for. So we do attract a lot of this in that highly energized state of consciousness. It seems like people want to help us, and we start projects, and in the mental health system, they might say, oh, you start a lot of projects and you don't finish them. But what we don't say to them is, people try to start projects with us. It's not only us. There are people that are really inspired by what we say, and some of them are like, yeah, let's do that. And so I feel that part of our role could be to help people find inspired creative projects to do together. But we can't necessarily physically actualize all of our ideas and insights into things. Sometimes it feels like we can see things from like an eagle eye view. So we could share with people, oh, what if you did it this way? Or what if you co-created with this person? Or blah, blah, blah. Could be more like consultants. But when we try to be the agents of our own ideas, then that would be like the queen ant having the idea to build this wonderful colony, and then just trying to build all the ant tunnels and the ant hill themselves and go get the food. That would be impossible. So other people, so to me it would say we need a way to attract people to co-create with us, because we do have a lot of great ideas. So it would be different that, say I'm in a state of mania for a month, and I'm like having different ideas and talking to people random, and they're like, no, get away from me, that's a dumb idea. But that's not true. I was talking about gardening with some guy one time, and he was almost willing to come over and build all these planters in my yard. So they all of a sudden are willing to come and help. But how do we do that in a bigger level? And me talking to myself is kind of saying to the other people in this other energy who have accessed it, to be like, hey, what have you seen? What have you envisioned? What can you do? What part can you play? to build something completely different that I don't know what it is. And it's not based on telling anyone what to do. It's people acting of their own passions. So yeah, so the power to attract the money, people, and resources you need to move projects forward. I'm hoping that that's what some of these videos might do. Well, I'm not really hoping that. I'm just wondering. I'm not hoping for anything. Hope is a projection, and it implies that I know what to hope for, and that would limit the possibilities. That would project onto the universe and say, hey, universe, I know what is supposed to happen, not you. And I know the intelligence is in the universe and not in my brain. So I'm not going to pretend to know. And, you know, as part of what we create, it'd be cool to have like a lived experience research division, which isn't about, you know, what meds and things, but what works in lived experience, not to calm down the intensity, but to make us more of who we are. And I think who we are is something that we find out by working together. We don't find it out by all having our little individual paths. You know, we live in the same eternity. So that's kind of what I do, and that's why for me it's not about finding the research, even though I do look at a little bit here and there when it appears. I don't go seek it out. I could, but that would create way too much information. Just being in the moment and exploring things in due time creates books of stuff that I want to talk about. So imagine if I studied other stuff, it would be ridiculous. So it'd be cool to have more people interested in this kind of research, and maybe to look into scientifically some of the hypotheses. These are little hypotheses. And something else I wrote that I realized is that, you know, I might think that certain people are against me, but it's not them, it's memory. It's psychological memory. It's the logic of the self. It's people with the memory, and they're acting based on the self. And some people have had this radical mutation, and then others around are still operating based on what they think of us. So think of it as memories, like people trying to talk based on memories and not on co-creativity. You know, people like memories because they can talk about what happened, and when we talk about that, nothing changes really. Like it's not co-creative. It's generally limiting. But then I realized that's okay if some people operate based on memories, and thinking of what Steve Pavlina said about that person who says they want to create good memories. I don't necessarily want to create good memories, but maybe I can give memory people some good memories. So my brain might be co-creative and thinking about all these books and ideas, but that has nothing to do with my parents. They're not interested in that, but they're maybe interested in having a nice memory of me or something. So can one do that? Sure, why not?